Welcome to the third annual Fayetteville Jazz Festival. My name is Chris Teal, and I am the director and founder. We're very excited to have partnered with Music Moves, especially on part of this panel. And so I'd like to introduce, first off, we have three artists in residence that are working with us throughout the weekend. We have Rodney over here, Alexa Tarantino, and Carmen Bruner. And representing the University of Arkansas, we have Dr. Kimberly Teal and Dr. Jeffery Murdock, and I will let them take it away. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, we're so excited to have you join us today. I am also a board member of Music Moves, and I'm so excited to be able to moderate this discussion with our esteemed panelists. And before we go any further, I'm going to have them introduce themselves in about 60 seconds. We're going to have them introduce themselves and kind of tell us a little bit about how they arrived in this space in terms of jazz music and what their expertise is and all of those things. So I will start on the end with good brother Rodney Black.
I knew you were going to say that. Start with me. Good afternoon. My name is Rodney Black, and I'm from Little Rock, Arkansas. And I'm here. I want to say thank you to Chris for the invite. I'm here because my relationship with Anthony Ball and Music Moves, I had a chance to participate in the Black Music Month and virtual concerts in the summer of 2020, and we had a great time, and he was highlighting Arkansas musicians and artists, and I was a part of that group of folks that presented during that month-long celebration. And Anthony and I have done some events, collectively over the last couple of years. So I play trumpet. It's interesting, I don't consider myself a jazz musician, but I do have an appreciation for the music, because you have to always go back to those cats that were doing it a long time ago and basically created this art form that's basically true to America. It's one of the few art forms that was created here. That's jazz music. So I play trumpet, I play a little bit of everything, but it's been good to me. I've been able to travel some really nice places and have a chance to play with some really great musicians and vocalists over the years, and basically just learn and kind of glean from all of these individuals that I get a chance to hear over the course of the year. So I'm here to learn as well, and not only perform. So that's why I'm here. That's how I got here.
Fantastic. Welcome, Rodney. We'll just stay in line, and so Dr. Kimberly Teal, will have you introduce yourself next.
Hi, I'm Kim Teal, and I am a musicologist here at the University of Arkansas, and I specialize in contemporary jazz and live jazz. So I teach a lot of music history courses, jazz history, and different research courses. And I also have a book coming out maybe next month, I hope, about contemporary live jazz venues, which now feels like this strange time capsule to the past. It was really funny finishing it up in a time where all the venues are closed. But I'm excited to have that come out and share some of my field work from venues from the last several years. And it's exciting to be here today.
Awesome, thank you so much. We would like to also welcome Alexa Tarantino. Please tell us a little bit about what you do.
Thanks, Jeff. Hi, everyone. I'm Alexa Tarantino. I'm so happy to be here. I live in New York City, and I'm a good friend of the Teals from our Eastman School of Music days in Rochester. So I'm very happy to be back visiting the crew. And yeah, I'm a professional saxophonist, woodwind doubler, composer, and educator in New York. I work with organizations like Jazz at Lincoln Center to just spread the love and joy of the music as far and wide as we can. So I'm very happy to be part of this panel and to learn from all of the amazing people around me. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you so much. And last but certainly not least, we'd like to introduce Carmen Bruner. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, thank you, Jeff. My name is Carmen Bruner. I'm from Bristol, Oklahoma. And my ties here today are from being involved with the project. My latest EP has been released, self-titled Carmen Bruner. And I was blessed to actually meet Anthony Ball and Reggie James. They were the band that actually saw my EP come to fruition, which I've had this dream since I was actually 25. So I've loved jazz ever since I was 14. And it's just great to be here amongst all these fine musicians. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, we're so excited to have all of you here today. And as we go through this discussion, we're going to kind of meander through various topics. But the overarching theme here is dealing with the way in which jazz music can be beneficial to and can facilitate the learning of music in an educational setting. And so we will talk about what those things look like. And so I have questions for each of you. If I ask a question of one of your fellow panelists and you feel like you'd like to weigh in on that discussion as well, please feel free to hop in. This will be much friendlier than a presidential debate and hopefully a lot more informative. So thank you so much. I'll hop right in. And this is actually a question for each of you because all of you are here as a part of the Jazz Festival. How did jazz impact your life growing up? So anyone can jump in first, but we'd like to know a little bit more about how jazz influenced your life as a child and getting you to this point.
For me, I would say I grew up with jazz being played in the household. Usually it was a lot of the Rat Pack that were on vinyls back then. So always being played. It really wasn't until I was 14 that when I heard George Benson's "Turn Your Love Around," that really just, it just captured me. So ever since then, I've just fell in love with jazz and just kept digging and just has become a part of my soul. So.
Wow. Do you remember when you first encountered just jazz as a student?
I would say in my early 20s.
Okay.
My early 20s.
Fantastic.
And then I was ready to start writing a little bit. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's going to be like musical chairs all day. Sorry, Rodney. I'll just jump in on that and say my first exposure to jazz was growing up in West Hartford, Connecticut, and I just coincidentally was raised there in a public school program that was really focused on jazz education and was very involved at like the national level, and so that was something that I think when I saw the jazz band play as a little third grader, the first person I saw play saxophone was actually a young woman. And so that I think was obviously had a huge impact on me, and I think led me on the path where, I didn't think anything of the fact that it was perhaps rare to see a young woman play saxophone. And I think in terms of the qualities that jazz education instills in students, it's really, basic human qualities that translate to being a good citizen and a good member of your community. Respect, responsibility, empathy, communication, work ethic, motivation, all of those things. I think those qualities were instilled, and so it's been just a huge part of who I am.
Yeah, it's interesting. Carmen, I don't know how big Bristol is, but I grew up in a small town in Dumas, Arkansas, which is like southeast Arkansas, about an hour from the border of Mississippi. So growing up, gospel music was more of what I was exposed to. We didn't have exposure to jazz music, and I think this is, something we need to work more toward, having that type of music in the school setting, that exposure. It's not, small towns are not like a New York or a New Orleans or a Kansas City where it's part of the culture. So I didn't have that growing up. I was in college let me back up. I played trumpet. I always heard about Louis Armstrong and Miles Davis and knew they were excellent musicians, but I didn't listen to jazz music. Fast forward, I'm in freshman and sophomore in college when Marcellus comes to University of Arkansas Monticello, and my perception of the trumpet completely changed when I saw this individual playing the trumpet. It could be very forceful, but then it could be very romantic and melodic. And from that point on, it's like, oh man, it makes you think, it makes you feel something. And I would say that was my first connection to jazz music. And then from that point on in college and graduating in my professional life. But I so wished I had that culture, that exposure when I was young, because it's what Alexa talks about. The students that play this type of music you're training them and educating them to be young people, adults that are going to be great in our society. Empathy, hard work, creativity. So jazz music definitely helps instill those kind of qualifications in students, and we need more of it, especially in the rural areas of our state.
Thank you so much. Dr. Teal?
Yeah, I guess I was actually fortunate enough to grow up in one of the few rural, small communities where jazz was unexpectedly at the center of musical community life. So I was in Columbia Falls, Montana, but somehow I ended up feeling like jazz was something special in my community before I ever listened to it recorded. So a neighbor who lived a couple houses down the street from me and was my first trumpet teacher also ran a big band for decades. And so my first experiences with jazz were with him, and then later playing with that band, which was cool to have this sort of multi-generational experience where I was, 13, 14, 15 years old and playing with folks that were in their 60s, 70s, and 80s and teaching me this music. And from that experience of being exposed to it in my community, I got interested in listening and started digging into Miles Davis and Chet Baker, and then eventually just followed that to my interest in jazz history.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I've heard all of you kind of speak to this just a little bit. My primary area of research is culturally responsive pedagogy, and so the ways in which we take students from where they are and how we journey together to teach them other concepts. Many of our music programs, particularly in K through 12, subscribe to or ascribe to a very specific kind of music and music education. And in many of those spaces, marginalized music is what I'll call it now. Things like gospel music, things like jazz, things like some of these other music that's not of the Western canon, so to speak. Those are left by the wayside. And many of the excuses that folks make is that, well, this music has no educational value. There's nothing that can be taught. And so I have come to learn much differently, but I would love to know from your experiences, what do you think jazz can offer in an educational setting to our students to make them more rounded, more well-rounded? And I'll start with, anyone can jump in, but I can call on someone if we need to as well.
I'll jump straight in and say that one of the things that I think is really exciting about jazz for students that's just very practical is the way that it gives people motivation to learn some of those oral skills and theory skills that help them do pretty much anything. So, even if I'm teaching at the college level or even with my graduate students, I find that the students that have that music theory closest to their fingertips are often people that have studied jazz and used that as a tool to really learn how to engage with music in a technical way.
Absolutely. So many times we write off these students who, and my background is also in gospel music. And so there's so many folks that I grew up with who were involved in gospel music and playing, and many of them are jazzers as well. You could call out, you can call out a chord progression, and they could play that chord progression perfectly. And they may not be able to necessarily read the notes on the page, and we say, well, they are not able to do this thing, this whatever this esoteric idea of music is. And so this idea of writing off those students has just been, it's been prevalent. And so it's good to know that, that the paradigm is shifting so that we know that our students can learn in different ways, and that that's useful as well, and that we can learn from each other in that way. Rodney, can you tell us a little bit more about how you came to use your experience in gospel music and how that developed into your academic experience?
Sure. Gospel music, that's my first love. Grew up listening to Andre Crouch, the Winans, The Commission was one of my favorite bands. Shirley Caesar, just a lot of great music. And when I started listening to jazz and getting into jazz, a lot of the stuff that I was hearing in gospel music, I've heard that before because they play it here. And it's been a great bridge because it just kind of lends to, I think, more creativity. I'm not an educator, but I just love the music. And we do these concerts in schools in South Arkansas. Basically, is to get kids excited about playing instruments and playing piano and playing drums and playing the horns. And one thing I found in my set, we always do a gospel song in my set. And the gospel music kind of appeals to that spiritual, that inner person on the inside. And then we flip it and we'll do something, maybe a Miles Davis tune that they may have not been so excited to hear jazz music, but they hear gospel music or any other popular music. And they say, okay, these guys can play this. Now they're playing this. Let me learn a little bit more about Ella Fitzgerald. Let me learn a little bit more about Miles Davis. Let me learn a little bit more about this guy called King Oliver from New Orleans. So I think it kind of helps enhance the musical experience for a student, and it gives them something to aspire to that they may not have had on their list. Because, young people today, Beyonce, Jay-Z, Cardi B, well, you wouldn't have those guys if you didn't have a Ella Fitzgerald, a Duke Ellington, or a Miles Davis. Jazz music gives you those tools that you were talking about to go into other areas, but you got to first kind of rein them in and say, hey, if you like this, learn this, because you'll be able to play anything that you want. And actually, jazz music is a little bit more heavier. It takes thought. It takes being creative to go somewhere that you've never been. And those folks that created it, they were able to go somewhere that we've never been to. I think of, the Louis Armstrong. I think of Jelly Roll Morton. Those guys, I had to learn about those guys. I didn't learn when I was young, but these people were creating something that was not there. So, and creativity doesn't stop. The greatest song hasn't been written yet. So I think jazz music, gospel music, they feed each other and they enhance each other. Hopefully this is making sense.
Indeed it does. Indeed it does. And actually something you said a few moments ago leads into a question that I have for Alexa, which is, what do you think that we can do today to get young people, more interested in jazz music?
Well, I think jazz music is a lot about being comfortable taking risks, and as everybody's so engaged on their phones and their apps and caring about what other people think and how many, comments and likes and all of these things that they want to get, taking risks becomes increasingly more difficult. So promoting a community or a classroom where making mistakes is good. And actually, Chris and I were just chatting about this last night, like the importance of celebrating people making mistakes, because that's progress. You know, if you only ever stayed in the lines and did everything by the books, you'd never exactly, what Rodney was saying, figure out where else you can go. So, but it's so important at the younger ages too, especially when, you know, students are going through puberty and there's the whole just hormonal situation and nobody wants to make a fool of themselves and it's just gets weird. It's like really, I think from an elementary and middle school education level, important to recognize the differences in each individual's experience at that point in time in their lives, where they're coming from and what type of support they need as a learner to feel comfortable taking risks. And it's individualized. That's why those positions, you know, elementary and general music and middle school, those positions, I have so much respect for those educators, because you can really be a fixture in somebody's life, or you know, it can unfortunately go the other way if it's not a good kind of fit. So I think for a lot of the people that I've spoken to who, you know, have had such positive experiences and maybe careers in music, it's because they had people in their lives that provided that for them at the educational level.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I enjoy the way that you have spoken to that definitely from a performance perspective. Carmen, could you elaborate a little bit more on that from a compositional perspective? Because there's a level of vulnerability, right, that is needed for that as well.
Yes, I agree. So when you have young children that are not exposed to that type of music, to jazz, I think it would be beneficial if the more educational provide that exposure, so that they can see, you know, it may enhance what they already have. You know, because if there's definitely a gift, you want to nurture that. I think theory, just in general, music theory is good for children, you know, young children in school, because you never know what avenue that's going to provide for them as an outlet. So I think that would be greatly beneficial as well.
So if I wanted to start being a jazz composer, if that's my lifelong dream, what would you tell me as a 12-year-old student if I wanted to start out I want to compose jazz? What advice would you give to me?
I would say take as many musical classes as you can, because even in different genres, you learn the pattern or the formula to create music. As they say, in a person knowing classical music, classical takes you everywhere. So if you can do classical, you can do jazz. That's my opinion.
I love that. I love that. Now, a lot of times in schools, there's a financial issue. There are other issues that prevent students from being able to be involved in jazz and other just extracurricular activities in general. If I'm a parent in an environment where jazz is an expensive extracurricular activity for my student, and I'm weighing the cost to the benefit, how might you and this question is for each of you, how might you convince me as a parent that my students' involvement in jazz music is important as an extracurricular activity? This is for each of you. Don't everybody jump in at once.
Well, I think I sort of alluded to it earlier, just the qualities of being a positive contributor to your community, your classroom, your society, whatever you're a part of. The fundamental elements of jazz promote those qualities, whether or not a student is going to be, the all-star band student or go on to be a professional musician or go on to do anything in music. I think the goal is just to give students something to take them on that journey of, long-term hard work and progress and payoff as opposed to like the instant gratification method, you know? And I always say to my students or parents, like, we're not here to make them into the next Miles Davis. If they want to do that, that's great. But, if 50% of these students go out to become doctors and teachers and scientists and whatever, if they had this early on, love or positive experience in band class, hopefully they will be the type of people to go out and subscribe to their local concert venues or, donate lessons to a student in need or things like that, like to contribute somehow to the musical ecosystem in their community.
Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, when I think about music and jazz and trying to convince a parent is just as important, as their son or daughter wanting to play sports or be involved in some type of club in the school. There's really no difference. Usually when students are a part of something, it's about community, the folks that you're playing music with, you're building a relationship, around jazz music. So you have to kind of look at that value that it brings to the student as well as, the student's family. And of course, every kid that plays on the basketball team is not going to get a scholarship and go, to a D1 school. But they are more likely, if they're in band and they're a good student, to be able to go to school and get some type of financial assistance. And they have a bigger family, they have a bigger tribe. The goal is building relationships, and building relationships kind of centered around this thing that we call jazz is a great family to be a part of. Because number one, you can call on those ancestors that created it. You can call on those folks that are doing it right now. And then you may be part of the future. And if you're really involved and your heart's in it and you have that talent and you have that gift, I went to school all 4 years on a music scholarship. I wasn't a music major. I just enjoyed music. In my adult life, I still enjoy music. I'm still able to travel and play, and my life has been enhanced by it. I have a brother that lives in Dallas, and he was the music guy in my family. He has a doctorate from UNT. He's a band director. He plays in the Dallas Jazz Orchestra. I tell people I'm a faker. My brother is the real musician, but we just loved it so much, and we're in the same family. He knows all the theory. He's that guy, and I'm like the person that just really enjoyed it. But our lives have both been enhanced because we've kind of centered around this thing called jazz music, around music in general. So a parent that has a young person that wants to play, they need to encourage that, And if they don't go on and get the scholarship and be this professional musician, they are that person that's going to be an attorney. I've met students that were like the top players, and they're physicians and attorneys in our community. They're the ones that are running the city right now. But the trade-off is a pretty good trade-off, So that's my perspective on that.
Amen. I like that. Anyone else like to weigh in?
I could just echo what people have already said, that it's so much about relationships. And I think one of the things that's really special about learning music for people growing up is it's such a great opportunity for one-on-one mentorship, working with a private teacher. And I know as musicians, we all have these stories about, the teachers that were really important to us, that we have these private lesson kind of experiences with that shape our lives. And it's hard to find those kinds of opportunities, if you're one of 50 people in a club, or how many people are on a basketball team? I don't know, 20 people? I don't know. But having that sort of one-on-one mentorship with someone who shares your interests, I think is always something that's just incredibly valuable. And I remember once, someone coming into my apartment and seeing a picture on my wall and saying, "Is that your dad?" Oh, no, that's my trumpet teacher, And I think we've all had at least one as musicians, teacher in our life who changed us as people in addition to the way that we developed as musicians.
Absolutely, absolutely. Since you're speaking now, Dr. Teal, I do have a question for you as a musicologist. How has the relationship between jazz and youth culture changed over time?
Yeah, so, we're talking a little bit today about how we're working with kids and they see that, music today is this certain thing that's pop music, that's hip hop, that's, for some of the students around here, country music or whatever it is that's their popular thing that's just jazz doesn't seem to fit with that. But of course, if we look back farther into, Louis Armstrong, as you mentioned in his own time, that is the popular music. And it really did emerge as this music of youth culture and music of rebellion even. And it's interesting to see sort of how things have swung over time, and that in the middle of the 20th century, there's this big push to get jazz recognized as an art music that was really successful and is so important in so many ways, because it's led to things like Jazz at Lincoln Center, where there's so much institutional support for this music and so much reach. And we have, Wynton Marsalis touring the globe, and we have PBS documentaries, and we have all this support that's really great. But then we also have seen in more recent years this swing back towards how can we reconnect jazz with popular music. And so there are so many professional jazz musicians playing today who are starting to rebuild some of these kind of collaborations between different genres, and to mix different genres and to do more, jazz performances of music that's drawing on contemporary popular music. So I think when working with students now, we can also kind of look and see, where can we reconnect with things that they're already hearing in popular music and show them, oh, if you like this Kendrick Lamar album, did you know that Robert Glasper's playing on here, and he's this jazz musician, and you can also listen to him in this other place. And I, as I was doing some of my field work, I actually went to a Robert Glasper concert where I thought people were like there at SF Jazz to like hear a jazz concert because it was Robert Glasper, but they were actually mostly there because he was collaborating with Bilal, who's this R&B singer who's super popular. So when he came on to do a couple of tunes towards the end of the set, that's when all of a sudden the audience was excited, and there were all these 20-something people in the front dancing and out on their feet and super excited. But now they've also been to this jazz venue and realized like, oh, these musics are connected. So it's exciting to see that kind of coming back into focus.
It's interesting that you mentioned the relationship, for example, between like Kendrick Lamar and Robert Glasper. So as we are trying to bridge that gap, what are some other examples, and this can be for any of you as they come to mind, what are some other examples of some popular artists that you could use or listen to or have students listen to connect to jazz musicians and the like?
Well, you have Sting.
Mm-hmm.
He has started out, in pop music, but he's now had gradually ventured into jazz. Not really sure if that's really what his first desire was, but he's definitely very good at it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I would say, I'm sure Alexa knew who this guy was. He's my favorite trumpet player of all time, Rory Hargrove. Rory Hargrove was a prodigy out of Texas, and I think Wynton may have discovered him. But Rory Hargrove was like one of the few musicians that could play straight ahead jazz at 8 o'clock in the morning, but he was hanging out with D'Angelo. He was hanging out with Q-Tip. Erykah Badu was like his best friend. He's on her albums. He was hanging out with Herbie Hancock, and he did an album of Cuban music. And it was great because you have this guy that can play straight ahead jazz, but he can play all the other stuff. So when I hear young musicians and I know they're kind of hip, I say, you need to listen to Rory Hargrove. Well, what should I listen to? I say, he plays everything, and he plays everything well. We lost Roy about 3 years ago, but he's like a Robert Glasper. Robert Glasper is on all kinds of soundtracks. He does a lot of stuff with Spike Lee. Terrence Blanchard is another great horn player that does jazz music, but anytime Spike Lee has a movie come out, Terrence Blanchard is doing the soundtrack. So you have these individuals, you may go to a Kendrick Lamar concert and you may see, a horn player, Marcus Prenham, he may be hanging out on the stage playing hip hop music. And when I see occasions like that, it makes me real excited. Say, hey, this guy is playing the type of music you listen to every day, but he plays jazz music. If you want to be like him, learn to play jazz. And I think those, when you can see those type of things happening, Rory Hargrove is the first person that came to my mind. Of course, Sting hung out with all the jazz musicians, Jeff Tame Watts, Kenny Kirkland, back in the late 80s, early 90s. Sting was a popular guy, but then he's hanging out with all these jazz musicians. So it makes you take a step back. If he's hanging out with jazz musicians, then maybe I need to start listening to this type of music. If I'm a real musician, I want to be a great musician. I should expose myself to things that are going to enhance my performance and me as a person. So,
anyone else have any thoughts about musicians that we can use to bridge the gap? And as you're thinking about that, a person who comes to mind as a vocalist and as a gospel musician is Mahalia Jackson. Because we hear, where I grew up and the way that I grew up, doing anything other than gospel music was the devil, and you couldn't listen to that music, and it was all bad. And it wasn't until I became an adult that I realized that Mahalia Jackson was a killer jazz vocalist. I had no idea, and I had no idea that was her background, because I was taught that she only sang gospel music and she only sang for the Lord, and that was the thing that she had to do. And there's so many gospel musicians, both vocalists and instrumentalists, who have gotten better and who came to prominence because of their love of jazz. Because singers who learned how to run because they've been listening to Ella Fitzgerald scat, right? Those kinds of things. And so I see a lot of that in my world as well. And the same trade-off can be made, I think, for classical music. Those things can inform each other, right? As a vocalist, my students are like, well, where did you learn to run? Well, I learned how to do gospel runs by singing Bach, right? And so those things can definitely be a trade-off. Can you think of, just for a couple more seconds, because certainly there are more musicians out there that we can use to bridge the gap educationally for students. Can you think of any more?
I would say in general that people who are jazz vocalists are great to bring people in, just because people are so used to hearing vocals in pop music that can be a draw. But folks like Esperanza Spalding, who are doing so many different things and really incorporating lots of different influences and getting towards that popular side, I think are also really interesting. So I would say, lots of contemporary vocalists, Gretchen Parlato or other people that are singing that, sometimes I find with my students that singers are an easier sort of doorway in. I'm listening to Ella Fitzgerald and she's singing words and I'm with her and I get it. Oh, and now she's doing this other thing. Oh, and now I'm listening to somebody do that on a saxophone and I still get it. Oh, look, I'm here. So I think sometimes that vocal music can help bridge the gap a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. While you're speaking, Dr. Teal, what about jazz history? Why is it important for students to know jazz history, and how can that be beneficial?
Sure. I think I think it's just such an important topic to be able to explore big themes in American culture and things that are really important right now in this historical moment and political moment, to be able to get some history and context about the way that this country has developed and how its values have developed and what kind of conflicts people have faced. So I feel like in the history of jazz as an African American music, there are so many opportunities to talk about the ways that people have negotiated not just art and culture, but so many other issues, how they've negotiated legal situations, how they've negotiated issues of race conflict, how they've negotiated issues of personal identity. So I think there's just so much rich material in there for people to sort of have an understanding of not just the past, but also like how did we get where we are now, and how can we get out of where we are now in certain ways. So I just think it's a really useful tool for thinking about bigger stories about our current culture.
Wonderful, wonderful. I have a question, and this is anyone can jump in, and this may be our last question depending on time, and we may actually have time for if someone in the audience would like to ask a question as well. But how do we've discussed quite a bit about what jazz music and jazz music education looks like in the school system. How can, if there's not an opportunity for the engagement in a formal educational setting, how might students find other opportunities or create other opportunities to engage with this music? If they don't have it in their household, if they don't have it in their schools, how might we bring jazz to those students? How can we reach the masses and change lives through jazz?
I think most popular right now, I mean, the best avenue to go is probably through the internet. You know, we have all of these, excuse me, all of the apps and all of the social media, you know, that you could ever want.
Mm-hmm.
So why not? Why not use that for jazz?
Indeed.
To spread that.
Certainly, certainly.
And I also think about the kind of groups that brought us here today, like Music Moves, like the Community Music School, like the Institute for Creative Music, all of these other groups that are outside of the schools, but that are helping to reach other students and other audiences. So it's great that people are doing this kind of community outreach work.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think if it's not in the, I mean, I didn't grow up in a musical family actually, so my school was what like introduced it to me. You know, I wouldn't have really had the introduction otherwise. But with the internet and now in COVID, like we've seen all these different ways people are actually making music together online. There are national organizations and opportunities, I think, to get people involved. I mean, I remember thinking I was like one of the only young female jazz saxophonists where I grew up, and then when I started getting involved and trying to find other organizations or attend certain conferences to learn more, I realized there was this whole other world of other people that felt like they were the same in their community. So sometimes I think it's like maybe sometimes you have to go out into a whole other world and make another connection. But yeah, just like Carmen said, the amount of music online, I was just going to say, just listen, just go on YouTube or whatever and listen.
Yeah. You don't have to hop in if you want to. I was giving you the stare.
I was just going to say ditto.
Fantastic. Are there any questions from the audience today about music and jazz in school? I think we have time for one.
So if you're a school educator and you're wanting to get your students interested in it, what would be a great resource, either it be an artist or some type of website or institution that you think that music educators should find for their students or can be helpful?
Well, I will, from a biased perspective, say that Jazz at Lincoln Center puts on a ton of free and virtual programming covering a wide range of styles, eras, instructors. And I know, Jazz St. Louis is very similar and a bit closer to where we are now. And there are just with, I think, some of those like more regional institutions, there's so much opportunity just to have it on in the house, on a Friday night or whatever, just to tune into something that you'd never be able to go to see in person. And then I think peer engagement is also really important, just putting them together with people that have the same, even if it's 2 people starting a little duo, or putting 3 people together that maybe wouldn't have found each other because they're from separate towns, and giving them an opportunity to do like a little farmer's market concert or something. I feel like when you can get the students like engaging and inspiring each other, then it's just like it snowballs into this other thing like outside of the teacher.
Thank you so much. Well, we're about out of time, so I want to thank Rodney Block, Dr. Kimberly Teal, Alexa Tarantino, and Carmen Bruner for being our panelists today and for allowing us to pick your brains in discussion. I'm Jeff Murdock, and I'm very thankful to have been your host today, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of the Jazz Festival. Thank you so much.